Hi and welcome to my video. Today I wanted to go through all my reading goals for 2021 so far. I'm aware that I'll probably add to the list, but this is what I've got so far. So 2020 has been a pretty productive reading, not quite a year because I started reading again in July, but reading 6 months for me. So I'm excited to plan ahead a little bit, hopefully not too unrealistic, but it's exciting anyway. So I have some general goals and some quite specific goals. So in general, I want to read 52 books, so a book a week throughout 2021. I might be able to do more than that, but I think that's like a more realistic way to start. And I know 2021 is going to be a busy year for me with dissertation writing and things, so hopefully one book a week will do me just right. Of those books, I want to read at least 5 books about psychotherapy and counselling. They don't have to be strictly theoretical books, like about psychotherapy theory, like Freud and that. It doesn't have to be that, but books to do with psychotherapy and counselling. For example, Irvin Yalom is a very well-known existential psychotherapist. He's very old now, but he's releasing a new book next year in March. And the way he writes, especially books such as Love's Executioner, are very accessible even to those who are maybe not in this field, because he writes like about his encounters with clients and they kind of read like a story, and he's a very, very good writer. So I would love to read more of his work, and just generally any books that might help in my own practice, but or just stuff that I'm interested in to do with psychotherapy and counselling. It doesn't have to be super academic, but that is my goal as well. I also want to read the books that I got in my Caribbean literature haul, which I made a video about recently. I bought 9 books by Caribbean authors. Most of them are older books. I want to read those 9 books next year, and I want to go through those and read way more books by Caribbean authors, but starting with those 9. I won't go through all the books now because I already made a video on them, but they're on my list. I also want to read one Murakami book. I have one actually. I have Kafka on the Shore by Murakami. The reason why I want to read his work is that he is so surreal, and I've heard so many like mixed things about how he writes and the meanings of his words, and loads of like people analyse his stuff. So it just made me really, really curious, and it'd be nice to read more like diverse authors. So I'm intrigued to read Kafka on the Shore. I've only given myself a task of reading one of his books in case I really hate it or in case it's just not for me, but I want to read this for sure. Another kind of big goal I have is to read more of Octavia Butler's work. I read Kindred this year and Mind of My Mind, and Mind of My Mind is the first in the Pattern Master series, which is 4 books. I have all those books, but I really, really love her writing style. I think she's great. It's like sci-fi, but soft sci-fi. It's not really intense. It's more like woven into the world, a little bit of the narrative and the characters, and I absolutely love her work completely. I read Kindred as the first book I read in 2020, in July, when I got back into reading, and it was just so good and I was so engrossed, and I just want to read more by her. I actually have written up a list of all her work and I'm like slowly ticking them off as I read them, so my goal is to kind of read them all. I don't know if I will read them all in 2021, but I want to try. It's my goal. Another goal I have is to read some work by Shakespeare. Obviously I've read like the standard stuff like Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet in school, but I haven't really read any of his work for pleasure. So I really want to read some of it, because I used to really like Shakespeare in school. I think it's one of the only sort of authors or whatever that school didn't completely destroy for me. So I really want to read it, but I've got 2 of his books ready, so I'm not sure where I'm going to start. I only want to read one this year, but obviously if I like it and I get into it I'll read more. But I've got his complete sonnets, so all of his sonnets in this book. So I don't know whether to just read these, because I do love poetry, and it has like a lot of sort of end notes, so it shouldn't be too difficult to get into and read. Obviously I've read some of his sonnets from school, but I haven't read them all, so I don't know whether to start with this one or whether to start with a play. I don't read many plays. I've read a couple, but I would like to read more. There's a few that I really want to read, but I got Measure for Measure, and the reason why I chose this play is because it's one that I don't know. I could have picked one I was familiar with, like Macbeth or something, or Hamlet, I don't know, but I wanted to try something that I don't really know much about. I know a little bit about it because he's so famous, but it's one that I haven't read, I don't know much about. I don't see people talking about it a huge amount on BookTube, so I thought maybe I could try reading something that is not too familiar with me as a bit of a challenge and see how I find it, and if I like it then maybe it'll encourage me to read more by the Bard. Also, I don't really read many classics, but I don't know if this counts as a classic. Well, I don't really read many like very well-known older books, but I'm really interested in reading Lolita. I know that's a little bit controversial because the subject matter is awful, you know, it's about paedophilia, but I feel super interested in reading it, maybe from a psychological perspective, I guess, since that's what interests me anyway in characters. But I know it's controversial, and if I can get a used copy I will, but I just feel really intrigued to read it and see how I feel about it, which I know is probably not going to be very good, but just to experience it myself a little bit, because you hear people talking about it and discussing it, and I want to experience it myself. So that's a bit of a strange, controversial goal, I guess. Next, one of my goals is to read more James Baldwin. So James Baldwin is such a well-known author. He's a black gay African American. Well, he was a black gay African American, and I haven't read his work. I've been really intrigued to do so. I know that he has the documentary I Am Not Your Negro, so I bought the book of that. So I want to read the book and watch the documentary because I'm really interested in finding more about him. I know he wrote Giovanni's Room and all those books that people know really well. So I'd really like to give this one a go. I also have Another Country by James Baldwin. These aren't necessarily the only books I want to read by him, but they're just the ones that I own and have been sitting on my shelf for a long time and I haven't read. And this one intrigued me, so that's why I picked this one up out of all his works. But I really want to give this one a go and read a little bit more from James Baldwin, since he is so like famous and well known, and I feel like it's my duty as a black person to do so a little bit. Okay, and I have a bit of a challenging goal for me. I don't read very much like standard sort of sci-fi or fantasy. I know they have like so many multiple subgenres and categories within them. I don't read much of them, and I kind of want to branch out a little bit more. I wouldn't say I read in my comfort zones. I read some very challenging books, not necessarily because they're academic, but because maybe the subject matter is challenging or it challenges me emotionally. But I do shy away from some sci-fi and fantasy because I find them I've mentioned before, a bit like intimidating. But I got hold of this book called Vagabonds. It was a new release this year by Hao Jingfang, and it's a Chinese sci-fi, which was what intrigued me about it actually. And it's a massive book. Oh my god, it's so big. It was translated by Ken Liu as well, but I wanted to give it a go. I don't know, I've never read any Chinese sci-fi, and it just sounded interesting. And this book I think it's about people that like now live on Mars. They're Martians now, but some people get sent back to Earth to study, and then they go back to Mars, and then they realise how messed up their world is or whatever. And I read some reviews of it and watched some other booktubers review videos of it, and it just sounded really cool, so I wanted to give it a go. But I know it's going to be a challenge. It's been on my shelf and I've been looking at it like, oh, I don't know, because it just seems so big, and I feel a bit out of my depth with sort of kind of intense sci-fi, because it's not really something that I've read much of in my adult life. So I'm going to challenge myself to push outside of my boundaries and read Vagabonds and read sci-fi. On the similar note, I want to read The Hobbit. I have The Hobbit. I have it on audiobook as well. I tried listening to the audiobook, but I was driving. I was like, doing a long drive, so I wasn't really fully paying attention because I was concentrating on the road, and I'd miss like a couple minutes or something that was being said, and I'd just feel completely lost in what was happening. But I know The Hobbit is a classic. I know people love it, and I want to understand. I've never been into the Lord of the Rings films. I've never been into The Hobbit. I know the films are trash for The Hobbit. I've seen the first one and I had no idea what was happening. And I know they're really precious to a lot of people, and I really want to understand and see maybe if they can have the same impacts on me. And with how the world is right now, any sort of escapism is welcome. So I really want to, really want to challenge myself and read The Hobbit properly, not just audiobook, just like actually read it. So I'm having to pay more attention than I might necessarily with audiobooks. So I'm gonna give that a go. I'm gonna do it. I tried listening to it and I just wasn't paying enough attention, I don't think. And it's quite an intense fantasy world where they change locations a lot. So if you sort of phase out for a minute doing something else and phase back in, you've missed quite a lot of lore and a chunk of what's going on. And I kept getting confused with who all the characters were, because there's so many dwarves, yeah, that are just all similar names, and I just couldn't remember who was who. And it was just a mess. But I'm gonna give it a go. I'm gonna respect Tolkien and give him a go. So my final sort of goal that I want to share with you is that I want to finish the Iliad. I started it this year, haven't been able to put much time into it because it's taken me a long time to read, because I am annotating it to death. For example, I am literally reading every line, writing my interpretations, writing the story that's already going on. I'm already quite well versed in Greek mythology just because I find it interesting, so it's not too difficult to read, but I really want to pay attention to it and appreciate the language that's being used and the story, because I love Greek mythology so much. But it's taken me a very long time to read. Like, I must only be just over 100 pages in, so I'm only this far in to this massive book. So every time I sit down, I have to dedicate a bit of time to it, because I'm reading it so slowly. And just the last couple of months, I haven't had time to do that. But next year, I'm going to dedicate some downtime to finishing the Iliad. I will finish it next year. I want to read the Odyssey afterwards. The translation I have is the Richmond Lattimore translation. I researched heavily which translation is the best of the Iliad, because there's loads available, so many different ones, so many more recent ones, so many earlier ones than Richard Lattimore's one. I read loads of articles comparing different passages from different translations, and I found that Richard Lattimore's suited me the most. And so far it's been great, but I need to finish it, and that's my goal. Okay. So that's quite a lot, I've realised. That's a lot. Considering I've only set myself 52 books, I've already given myself quite a few to read out of that list. I don't think it leaves much room for other things, but we'll see how I get on. But I'm really excited. This year has been a good reading year for me, and I've learned quite a lot about myself and what I like, and it's been so good. So I'm really excited for what next year brings. And even if next year is just as trash as this year, at least I'll have something good to look forward to and good to indulge myself in reading. But thank you so much for watching. Happy reading, and I'll see you around.